What's up, YouTubers? So before we get started with this video, on First Take, they're going to be talking about, are the LA Clippers made to beat the LA Lakers? So let's see what they have to say about that.
It ain't over till it's over, and the Clippers proved that last night using a 25-10 run in the fourth quarter to beat the Mavericks. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George combining to score 53 points. After the game, head coach Doc Rivers was asked about where his team ranked on a scale of 1 to 10 without being at full strength. He said, "That's a good question. I don't know, 6 or 7. Still have Trez out. We still have several guys that have minute restrictions that put a major problem on us tonight, especially with the guards. We still have Pat out." All right, so only at a 6 or 7, so they are nowhere at full strength, Richard. And
so I would say just before the quarantine, I said the Lakers really closed the gap between, them being able to beat the LA Clippers. Like I said, the series is tied up 2-2. They have a ton of momentum going into, just before the quarantine with wins, beating big teams. So, I think the gap has definitely been closed. Although the quarantine or the living in a bubble, that may have messed things up a little bit, messed up the timing, and certain players getting hurt, and just kind of the whole thing just being kind of weird. But I would definitely say it's a lot more closer between the Lakers and the Clippers at this point. So let's continue.
Matt, back with us here. Dominique, let's start with you here. So they're not at full strength right now. We see what they can do, not at full strength. Should the Clippers be the favorites to win out the West, in your opinion?
I picked the Clippers beginning of the season, then I switched over to the Lakers, and I want to stick with my Lakers right now. But it feels like everything has changed because of this bubble situation, and all the changes have been in the favor of the Clippers. So, like, the home court advantage situation, that mattered to the Clippers more than anyone else because of that situation where even at their home court, they were probably going to have more Lakers fans there in the conference finals if that turns out to be the case. And then,
so I don't understand how there'll be a home court when they both play in the same court. There's not going to be that much of a difference other than the coloring that they put up, I guess. So I don't understand that.
and you get more rest for Kawhi Leonard, who no one really knows exactly how his knee is holding up, his leg is holding up. That rest probably pays off for him because they were doing that whole load management thing with him, and then they'll get all these guys back. And then you look at what's happened to the Lakers since they've gone into the bubble, nothing but bad things, really. It's like they got the injury to Rondo and Avery Bradley, like those guards, we keep talking about them not having that, and then, again, losing the home court situation, which you think would have benefited them. However, I'm still sticking with my Lakers for not my Lakers. I'm not a Lakers fan, but the team that I picked, the Lakers, to win because the two best players are better than any other two best players, in my view, in the league, and AD and LeBron. And I trust LeBron in late game situations. Not that I don't trust Kawhi in late game situations, but I think the difference between talent and AD and what you get in Paul George, I think is significant, despite the fact that all the role players that the Clippers have are better than the role players that the Lakers have.
So I'm going to have to probably pick the Clippers. It's a lot more closer than it was before they went into the bubble. Like I said, just before the quarantine, the Lakers are running hot the whole time, and they just beat the Clippers. And I think they just beat, Milwaukee too. So they were running super hot. But when they got into the bubble, the injuries popped up, and things just got weird with people, trying to leave the bubble. And, how long you're going to have to quarantine, and then not practicing, have 3 months off. They kind of threw up the timing and the rhythm. But I think it's definitely a lot more closer between the LA Lakers and the LA Clippers. But I'm going to have to still go with the Clippers, but it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy at all. So let's continue.
So we say role players, and you do make some very good points. You say role players, as in Lou Will is just a normal role player. No, Lou Will would be the third best player on the Lakers. I'm going to make an argument that Montrezl Harrell would be the third best player on the Lakers. So when you start going down this list, and you have Morris, you have Landry Shamet, you have a bunch of talented players, you have depth, and one thing you need in the postseason is depth. And let me tell you this why. When you have Doc Rivers and you have T. Lue on that other side, and their ability to play the chess game and playing matchups and tweaking, because LeBron James means so much to their offense, 25 points, 11 assists, Anthony Davis, you can put a smaller player on him, but the Clippers also have big players to put on him. Physical players. Montrezl Harrell is a physical player that can affect AD. So when you start looking at that depth,
True.
and I'm going to say this, we often talk about coaching. Love Frank Vogel, Love Lionel Hollins. Jason Kidd is a mentor. But ultimately, if you're going to say who's got the advantage coaching, you have two coaches that have won NBA championships and have been to a total of 5 NBA finals on the other side with the Clippers. So you'd have to give them the edge in coaching. You'd have to give them the edge in depth. And even then, when we're talking about LeBron James trying to run pick and roll, trying to play that basketball IQ that we know he plays so well, who's he switch on? Patrick Beverley? That's not a cakewalk, even though he has the advantage. Paul George? Then you have Morris? Then you got Kawhi Leonard? You look around, they are built specifically to beat the Lakers, and also why the Clippers would dominate the Milwaukee Bucks if the Bucks were to get there, because they have multiple players that can guard Giannis. So the Clippers are by far the most deep team and the best team when you look at coaching, star players, all the way down to their supporting cast.
So that's a great argument, but I still think it's not going to be a cakewalk with LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and a couple others guys, Kuzma. All those guys are playing pretty good right now. But obviously LeBron James is sitting out because of a apparent growing injury. But I think he just wants to sit out, so he's as close to 100% as possible. But I still think I'm still worried about, the LA Lakers. They tied up, the series 2-2 with the Clippers. They had the most recent 2 wins against the Clippers, so they have that momentum going into it. But I think, the Clippers will beat them, but it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy at all. And LeBron James is going to have to go all out, because if he sits out or doesn't play or is not having a good game, that's going to mean some trouble for the Lakers. But still, so let's continue.
I mean, I don't really even need to talk. Thanks, Rich. No, but
I got you, Maddie. I got you.
Come on, you got it.
hey, my beginning of the season was the Clippers. For every reason you mentioned, just their depth is second to none, and I think they're playing themselves. I don't think it's going to be pretty by any means, because I think to what Doc said, they're still at a 6 or 7. Trez is not fully back in the mix. Pat Bev is not fully back in the mix. Lou's still getting acclimated. But I just think it's kind of been that way the whole season. But you see flashes with this team, and talent wins games, coaches win games, defense win games, and they have all those. They have so many bodies. Like you said, their 2 best players, the Lakers' 2 best players, are better than any 2 other players in the league. But these guys right behind them are the next 2 best. But I have them winning a championship this year.
Yeah, but the depth, I guess obviously you guys all know better than me, but I feel like there's a difference between depth and flexibility. So I think the Clippers have some flexibility that is valuable, but I've never really noticed depth mattering that much in the NBA playoffs. Like, isn't that when the rotations tighten and you only get like 7 to 8 guys? Like, depth to me doesn't sell me. Now, the idea that they are flexible and they have different guys to play different styles and defend LeBron and AD in different ways, I understand that, and that's valuable. But the basketball that I've watched, it seems like the people with the best stars, the teams with the best stars, often are the ones that go further in the playoffs and make those big plays. And you mentioned pick and roll earlier. As talented...
Hold on before we get into the pick and roll. You still have to rotate your star players out. I mean, they do get tired. You do want to rest them up, especially when it gets down to the fourth quarter. You want to maybe take them out just before, halfway through the fourth quarter, so you can have them playing through the end of the game. I mean, that's with all sports for the most part. It's not just basketball. So let's continue.
As the Clippers are, there is no answer in the league, in my mind, to LeBron James and AD pick and roll. Like, there is no coverage. As long as you have shooters out there, there's no coverage that stops that. There's no group of players, as talented as these players are, in late game situations. I feel confident that pick and roll at the top of the key, if the role players are shooting well, and they have Danny Green, they have guys who can shoot well enough to that you have to respect them, like, that's going to be hard to stop. I don't see an offensive set or an offensive player that I have as much confidence in on the Clippers side of the ball. If you hand them the ball, the Kawhi and PG are both talented and great scorers.